This is Drew Spence from the Dynamic Universe with a quick run through of depth of field in Daz Studio. Depth of field is controlling what parts of an image or picture are in focus and which ones are out of focus. It's usually used to control the focus of an area of your eye's gaze. So you intend to focus on the main subjects and the background is blurred and unfocused, which allows your attention to draw in. Sometimes it's good if you have a very complicated and busy background. Sometimes the foreground action gets lost. It could also be used to have objects very close to the camera come in being blurred, and it gives you a real sense of depth and being there. In this sense, we're looking at it in context of my comic. This is a 4/6. I have a big complicated fight scene. There's a lot going on in the background, lots of characters, architecture, the fence. So what I wanted to do was be able to control the amount of focus on my main characters. I wanted you to really look at them and not get so caught up in the background. It was good for some establishing shots that you got to see what was going on in the background, but once the action kicks in, I really want you to focus on the fighting figures. So what we do is we start, usually Daz is in perspective mode, and that's where I'll usually place the camera of where I want to capture. So I'm gonna make my first set here, and I make an adjustment, and I want my characters really inside the frame. I want them to eat the frame up and be the central focus of action. So I usually put the camera in perspective mode here where I want my camera. From there, I go to create a new camera, and I'm creating a camera using the active perspective view, which means the camera is going to be in the same place that I left my perspective view. So I want the camera to be the exact same frame, shape, everything. So I'm going to call this the DOF camera so that I know it's the one I'm going to be using, and I create a new camera. Now that I have a camera on my set, I want to use the perspective to look at what the camera is doing. So what we do is we go to the camera first, we go to its parameters. This is the camera, and the camera's parameters, I see over there's depth of field, and I want to turn it on. Once I turn it on, it activates the depth of field, and in perspective mode, with the camera selected, I can now move around freely and see what the settings are. So what I see when I pull back and look at the entire scene and camera, what I see is the new camera I just created. This camera here is my DOF camera. That's the one I just created. So it shows a graphic of a camera pointing at my scene where I left it. And I see in this grid, this is the area that has focus. Between these lines is what's in focus. Behind it is out of focus, and before it is out of focus. This is the area that will be very sharp and crisp when I do my render. And what I want to do is I want to do some editing of this area. So I go to my parameters. I'm on the camera again, and I'm looking at focal distance, which yes is distance, and f-stop is the width. So I take the width of it, and I can actually make it that both the referee and my characters are in focus. So I have a bit of my characters in focus, and I have the full referee. If I want to slide this forward some, I go to the f-stop, and it will allow me to tighten the field in, tighten it, move it and tighten it, I want to move it. And now, if you look, I'm tightening up and moving it so that this is now what's in perspective. I want to move the bars again, so I'm moving them even closer, using the f-stop to tighten it up, tightening it up. And now what I get is a very narrow field of focus where just the actors, the principal fighters, are in focus and everyone else isn't. When I look at it from the angle, I will see that I have my fighters in focus, and the background referee and the rest of this will end up getting blurred out and having less sharp details to it. That's pretty much how it works. The slight cheats are, if I would like to, what I can do is narrow this even more, and I'll show you an example of that. And I can actually leave parts of the fighters out of focus. I actually use this in the comic where I let the nearest nearest parts of them be out of focus. And I use that when I usually do nature shots. And if I want leaves to be falling, I'll have the leaves closest to the camera be blurry and the farthest leaves be also blurry. And it really gives you a sense of you being there. But we can control that. What else? Let's do it again from the beginning, because I know I like to see things done twice. So I get rid of my camera. I'm using my perspective shot. I also do this as an overhead shot where I actually let the characters be in focus and I let the matte be out of focus. So I basically had done a camera from this angle. But let's do it again. Let's pull in with a close shot. Maybe here's where I want my action to get crazy and I want to get just certain aspects to be in focus. What I'll do is I'll create a new camera. We'll call this one close depth of field. And I know that's the camera I'm going to use. I'm copying my active view, which is the perspective, because that's where my camera is now. I hit accept and I've got a new camera. I want to get to those parameters. So I go to that camera, I'm in its parameters, and I turn on the depth of field. And it's turned on. Now using the perspective, I can slide back and see what I've got. Now in this case, the camera's pointing above and down at the action, and I'll see that really the hip area is where the focus is. So you want to widen that up a bit. You want to widen it up a little bit and move it. As you can see, I'm moving the forward area. I'm moving this forward area to put what I want the focus to start from. So I'm moving that, I'm making adjustments. The f-stop is widening and narrowing the field itself, and I'm moving the ends. Distance is how far away, and you can make adjustments on both. So this time I really have just the head would be in focus, and his head would be in focus, and everything else would be out of it. And if I want to check what I've got inside my frame, I go to my camera and I switch to the cam. And now I would be seeing what's going to happen here. This will be my frame that gets rendered in Daz because I chose those settings in my render settings. But this is what I'm going to get. I'm liking the look of it. And I will switch to render mode and begin to render this shot. And then we'll take a look at some of the examples of what we get after we're done rendering. These are some examples of the book itself. We started out with a complicated shot. These are the raw renders from Daz, not really edited for the comic yet. But we had the fighters squared up. You can see the background. There's a lot going on. We have drones, lights of all kinds. We have the fighters getting ready to fight. The action begins. This is one of my first times using it, where the background is blurred and the foreground is in focus. And it was a way to sort of just wash out the background so we didn't really see what was happening. This was the above view. DOF was enabled, and I stopped at the hip area. So right below their hip area, we began to let it go into a blur, and we get a sense that the action is happening up here and everything around them is somewhat blurred. This shot's the same thing. We wanted a counter rib shot to actually the missed punch. We wanted to be the focal point and the background to just lose itself. This is an isolated shot where I can either change the background to a full wash, do it in a composite, or do it in Photoshop, or make two shots of it and just blur the background manually so I can control the amount of blur. Full shot. This is me backed outside of the cage, and I like sometimes the way the cage gave a certain nice netting sort of texture. Again, focus in the foreground, action out. Full shot. I fell in love with the cage look, so I ended up using it as an entire frame. But again, we have the close action happening here, and the background is blurred. This was one of those shots I was telling you about where I left the foreground elements blurred, and I narrowed it so close that really only his head was in focus, and everything else was outside of that box. Same thing again. So you can see how we could use it when we want to have a lot of detail, show you a big shot, give you lots of attention to the background. We'll leave it off. Then we want to really tie in the action. We sort of bring it in close, and we can look at it in the actual finished book. Let's take a look at it in the actual comic. You can see that as the fight begins, We have some of the action happening here. There it is with extra effects added, but you get the idea of how we have some shots. This is the isolated shot with the full background being removed, and I add the background myself. This could have been a background from a Daz product, or it could have been just a wash I did with a light purple to a rosy color. I'm not really sure which one I used for that. But, with extra effects, action lines, plus controlling the focus, you get a good amount of attention right where you need it, and it's very easy to control using DOF. It adds an extra nice touch of realism to your renders and your shots. In this particular case, we have a nice area here where the fence is out of focus, and it gives a nice texture on it. I almost did this in post because I didn't know if the fence was going to be a problem with the camera work, but it worked out nice. I didn't need to do it myself. Just using a natural 3D set, it looked real good. But this is an action sequence. DOF is pretty easy. It's pretty important and integral to most people's workflow. You're going to really want to learn that to add a true sense of 3D in your work. And it really gives a natural look. I mean, so important to movies, TV, controlling where your focus goes based on that DOF effect. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll be doing some more of these. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is Drew Spence from the Dynamic Universe, and this was a part pulled from my Digital Art Live webinars that I just went over a little bit more clearly. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys.